Chapter 2. Tanlin wrote furiously in his black journal by the light of the fire. The green flame cast just enough light for him to see his writing, even if he had to tilt the book at a slightly awkward angle toward the light. The fire took up a space merely the size of a fist, but despite its size, the dassip flower could burn for days. Details of Threvenelt emerged in his mind of all he had seen at the desolate village. Tanlin flipped back a few pages to reference what he had jotted down earlier that day when they had arrived at Threvenelt. The detail was good, if a bit rushed, but that was typical when attempting to capture surroundings in the moment. Now that he had the opportunity and time, he reviewed his material from the day and edited the information to make it cleaner, sprinkling in descriptions that came to mind for additional effect. Tanlin closed his eyes and recalled the sequence of events at the small village. The details were vivid, as they would be for the next few days. Maintaining the images was not difficult to manage, so long as not too much time had passed since the event. Still, Tanlin wished to finish his records as soon as possible after the events. Fyevna sighed beside him, but he ignored her. She made several, 4 to be exact, vain attempts to attract his attention. Tanlin knew how desperately she wanted to address the situation, that his Zayeth had suddenly disappeared from him getting too close to the tainted Eteth. Well, at least Fyevna said it was tainted, but Tanlin couldn't be sure exactly the cause of the problem, if a problem is what it could be labeled. After all, he felt fine. Fyevna sighed yet again, the shortest interval between her futile distractions. It wouldn't be long now before she came up with some clever quip to really gather his attention and have him put his notes away. Sometimes Tanlin allowed those moments to come, as they were typically quite witty. However, he had just finished his last thoughts, squeezing in the final few words at the very bottom of the page. Fidgeting with his pencil between his fingers for a few moments longer, Tanlin finally closed his journal and slipped both the book and his writing utensil in his satchel that sat beside him. Taking a sigh of his own, Tanlin stretched and looked at Fyevna. She wasted no time and said, "Do your fancy notes have anything to say for your Zayeth disappearing?" Tanlin smiled. Only that one of us 3 showed any real concern, and she can hardly be trusted. Fyevna reached back and slapped his arm. This one stung a little, and had he cared to, he would have admitted it. But he thought it best instead not to give her the satisfaction.
"It's not funny, Tanlin. Something is actually wrong with you, and I'm not just talking about your stupidity. Your Zayeth is gone, Tanlin. That's not good."
At these few last words, Fyevna leaned in closer. As if that would make her point clearer, Tanlin's smile faded slowly as he examined Fyevna's visage. He was used to her passion and perhaps made light of it too frequently. But this time he saw more than just surface-level concern. Her brows were not quite furrowed, so she wasn't angry, at least entirely, with him. Her eyes stared back at his. He noted real concern there and fear? Yes, that was it. Fyevna was scared. Not for herself, of course, but for him. Though he wouldn't have difficulty recalling this conversation later for his notes, he made sure to make a mental note of her in this moment. Emotions seemed to be the least important of details when reporting on the facts of the matter, but maybe there was something here that could differentiate him even further from his cohorts, the other Fyevna. "Noted," he said, aloud to his own thoughts. Fyevna sat back and scrunched her face.
"Noted?"
she asked.
"Sorry," Tanlin said. "Just thinking. All right, Fyevna, tell me, what happened to my Zayeth?"
Sefheln sat upright again and set her hands in her lap. For a moment she didn't say anything, staring instead at the fire. The green flame reflected off her dark eyes, and for a moment Tanlin watched in a daze the fire that was there. Of course, those eyes were typically fiery anyway. Sefheln was a fierce flame all on her own. Sefheln turned her head and eyed him down. That innate fire had returned.
Tanlin, I need you to listen to me now. What I don't need is for you to make light of the situation or dismiss my words.
Tanlin opened his mouth to answer, but his companion continued.
Tanlin, your Zayeth is gone. Maybe though gone is not the right thing to say, it's gone. It hasn't returned to Mezhyitzh like it should. It's not somewhere where it's waiting to be restored. It's disappeared. It doesn't exist anymore. I don't understand how this doesn't make you concerned when you seem to be so concerned with every little detail of every little event and every day of your life. I'd recommend, though, that you be concerned ever so slightly. That's just a suggestion, though, from someone who has done nothing but interact with the Zayeth her entire life.
Tanlin continued to stare at Sefheln. More often than not, her passion, whether it manifested as excitement or worry or some other form, took the forefront. One response he needed to put to rest was pointing out to her that while she may see the Zayeth and carry out its duties, it was he who had studied and knew the Zayeth better than her. When he didn't respond, Sefheln opened her mouth to speak again, but then shut it. She did this a few times to Tanlin's amusement, when at last she said,
I'm done now. That's all I wanted to say.
Sefheln turned toward the fire again, wiping her pants to smooth out the wrinkles, a habit of hers Tanlin took note of not long after they had met. Tanlin knew at this point he could end the conversation by either writing in his notebook again or just sitting there and remaining silent. He was curious, though, what happened to his Zayeth. What an interesting thing if it simply just decided to leave him. He didn't doubt his Zayeth was absent at this time. Sefheln could easily see that. But non-existent? That seemed far-fetched. But until some concrete evidence or detail showed itself, it was all speculation. It had been some time since Tanlin bridged the gap between fact and speculation, and maybe this would be a fun endeavor to take on at this time.
Sefheln,
he said. Sefheln started slightly, obviously surprised he wanted to continue talking.
What do you think happened?
Sefheln sat even straighter and took a deep breath.
I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I know that your Zayeth is completely gone now, even after having you sip from my Fyevna.
Sefheln gestured to the round device hanging from her neck.
Your Zayeth did not return. That's never happened. Never.
While Sefheln hadn't studied the subject matter on replenishing the Zayeth like he had, what she said was true.
So, I'm unique, is what you're saying?
Tanlin smirked.
Hardly. The situation, though, is, of course, unique. It's also so wrong and frightening.
Frightening? Tanlin asked. How is that? Sefheln shook her head.
Frightening because of your soul, of course.
Sefheln looked at the fire and her fingers tensed on her knees.
Tanlin, without the Zayeth, there's nothing preserving your spirit, your soul. I don't even know how the lack of the Zayeth will affect you physically, but whatever damage that may be done to your body doesn't compare to dying without a full soul.
Tanlin blinked several times. The moments when Sefheln talked seriously about the Zayeth and her ideas on its effects were awkward and were usually preceded by silence from both himself and narrate. Fyevna, he said, we have recorded on several occasions when an individual did not possess the Zayeth for days, and in a few instances, weeks. No physical deficiencies were noted in any of those cases. Physical deficiencies? But no one has been able to study someone who's died without the Zayeth, have they? Tanlin didn't respond, but shook his head. Have they? Fyevna repeated, this time sterner. No, Fyevna, we haven't. Unfortunately, once someone has died, it is very difficult to have them run through tests and questionnaires. Fyevna scoffed and turned herself away from Tanlin. I wish you would take me seriously, she said. A laugh sounded from across the fire. Narrate sat there with his arms crossed and his back leaned against a tree. Until now, the Fyevna had kept silent, and silent now he was after his intrusion. What's so funny? Fyevna asked, begrudgingly bringing her Fyevna into the conversation. If I'm welcome to speak plainly? Fyevna nodded. You ask for your intelligent young Fyevnathan over there to take you seriously, when neither of you have spared even a second to look at the real danger here. Fyevna, quit worrying about Tanlin's shocking soul. It's not like any of us know where our souls go after we're spent here. No. Narrate raised a hand to preemptively stop Fyevna from responding to that last comment. Please, spare me just a minute, if you would be kind enough, my Fyevna. Where our souls go and how they go, and what role the Zayeth plays is subjective, plain and simple. You may not like it, but hey, I don't like having to babysit, and yet here I am. And Tanlin, why don't you, for just a moment, lift your nose from that little journal of yours and think for yourself about what happened today? Do any of those notes contain even a hint of what you think may have happened today? Or did you spend a page describing what I chose to adorn myself with for today's endeavors? Tanlin turned slightly red at this, not because he was angry, but because he did in fact make a note each morning of what each wore, as he found starting the day with simple descriptions helped him best. It didn't matter if their traveling clothes were the same day to day. Both of you need to stop the incessant bickering and actually think about what happened at Threvenelt means for all of us. Narrate sighed so heavily, Tanlin envisioned that he had somehow sunk himself even further into the tree he leaned against. Despite Narrate's chiding over Tanlin and his constant journaling, he pulled out his writing things again and jotted a quick couple notes. All right, Narrate, he said. You've obviously had time to mull things over. What do you think happened today? Narrate was quick to answer. I don't know. Fyevna sighed with irritation, and Tanlin cocked his head at him. And is this conclusion based on your critical thinking of the matter at hand after a few long, exhaustive hours? Tanlin asked. Fyevna giggled at this, and Tanlin felt relief at her reaction. Narrate, though, ignored the teasing. I don't know what happened, Narrate repeated. However, I've thought about it some. And? Tanlin pressed. I think it all must have something to do with the L, Narrate answered. This time it was Fyevna who laughed, heartily, if a bit forced. The L? She asked incredulously. Fyevna leaned forward toward Narrate, until Tanlin thought she may topple off the rock she was sitting on. Narrate, the L doesn't control what the Zayeth does. We utilize it, preserve it, whatever you want to say we do with it. But causing it to change like this, and in such a dark way, that's not the L, Narrate. Tanlin scratched a few more notes. Highlights of the conversation so far to catch up to the dialogue at hand. Of course you'd think that, Narrate challenged. You're a shocking Fyevna, a member of the L. Nothing to get upset about. He said this as Fyevna started to cut him off, but she quickly sat back and kept her mouth closed. All I'm saying, Narate continued, is that while you are out here, using the Zayeth, what are the Threvel doing in all their free time? They aren't married. They don't parade around the city. Can't be that difficult to maintain a big bowl of water. Something's obviously happened to your Zayeth, and they've let it happen. Narate muttered something else that Tanlin couldn't distinguish. Based on Narate's distaste for the Threvel, the leading members of the El, he assumed it was something against them that was too vulgar to say in front of Fyevna. It was quiet now. Fyevna was clearly pondering her next words. Tanlin marked a couple more notes down on his paper, setting reminders of the tone and emotion so far in the conversation. The small fire flashed momentarily as it ate away at the dacip. Tanlin looked up, and, for a moment in the brightness, his gaze met Narate's dark eyes. While the connection only lasted a second or two before the flame settled again, it still made Tanlin uncomfortable.
Narate,
Fyevna said, staring into the dark canopy above them as if still lost for thought.
You can think what you want of the El. I don't care. You've been good to me as my Fyevna, and that's all I can ask for.
She lowered her face now, staring at the ground and shaking her head.
I admit I don't know how our souls are tied to the Zayeth, but with surety I'm convinced that it's so. I can see life in us when we replenish with the Zayeth, and I see it drain away when it depletes, as I see yours and mine draining now. I'm not going to convince you. I just want to make it clear, whether you see it the way I do or not, that we should all be concerned about Tanlin. If not for his soul, then certainly something has altered in some way that is contrary to what we all have known and lived.
Fyevna slunk down from her seat onto the grass floor and leaned against the rock. She tucked her knees under her chin and stared flatly at the fire. Tanlin nodded slightly and took down another quick note. This speech was particularly worth recording, not just because it was those overlooked details that had separated him from others and helped him enter the Fyevna where he trained to become a Fyevnathan, but also because Fyevna was interesting, and so studying her behavior proved a satisfying endeavor for him. I still think the shocking Threvel messed up, Narate said. Tanlin glanced at the Fyevna, who was scratching his bald head. Narate couldn't resist adding finality to his thoughts. Fyevna stayed in her position, the bright flames reflecting off her dark eyes and lightening her gray skin. Well, Tanlin said, closing his journal once again, I'll say this. I'm not concerned with my Zayeth gone. He thought that this would yield a reaction from Fyevna, but apparently the night's conversation already had her spent. I'm not saying that there's no link between my spirit or soul, if I even have one, but whatever's happened, it's obviously important that each of us is concerned in our own ways. Well, for me, I'd say less concern and more intrigue. I mean, I can't recall anyone ever having just lost their Zayeth, and with what happened at Threvenelt, there's something going on. Out with it, Tanlin. Narate sighed, staring at the fire and looking disinterested. Right, Tanlin continued. Well, I think no matter the situation, my soul damned or not, we should look further into this, yes? Fyevna shook her head, which still rested on her knees. No, we need to go back to Meziet. The Threvel needs to examine you. Narate huffed at this, but Fyevna continued. I don't know what's happened, but if anyone does know, it'd be them. Of course it'd be them, Narate said. If they're the ones that have failed, they'd know about it. Oh, come on, Narate. Fyevna did lift her head this time. I feel stupid for just engaging with you about this, but you won't shut up.
There's no point in the Threvel concealing a mistake this big. It'd be just as insane if the Itanyeth were to collapse.
The Itanyeth? Our cloud wall? Collapse? Ha! Narrate's mouth widened with an entertained smile. Fyevna's barrier has held for centuries. All on its own, I might add. No, I take my chances with the Itanyeth over the El, thank you. Sepheln's face twisted in an odd way as she looked for words to shoot back at Narrate. But rather than unleash on her protector, she instead pivoted the conversation back to making a decision. Tamlin wondered if Sepheln noticed the sly smile Narrate maintained.
We need to return to Mezziet so the Threvel can look at Tamlin. Whether or not there is a simple solution, at least they can examine you.
It's not that simple, Narrate said. Even if you are right, and they can help Tamlin, that doesn't automatically bring back an entirely deserted village. Tamlin nodded this time and waited for Sepheln to agree.
You're right, she conceded. If this happened to one, it could happen to another.
Tamlin finished writing a couple more quick notes before closing his journal yet again and tucking it away.
Well, he said, the nearest village is Fyevna. No, Sepheln said. I'd rather visit another closer to Mezziet. That way we are still moving nearer to the city.
Sepheln, Narrate said, standing this time and stretching. If I am right, and the Threvel has failed and allowed something sinister to slip into our borders, then the closer we are to the border of Fyevna, the better position we will be in to test that theory. At the very least, if I'm wrong, we'll know quickly. Then we can travel back to Mezziet.
Sepheln looked at Tamlin to see if he had any more to add, but he didn't say anything.
Undoubtedly, Tamlin's preference would be to venture nearer to the edge of Fyevna, where he could potentially witness the Vouiev, the breaking.
All right. We'll go to Fyevna, but we make quick work of it, yes?
She eyed each of them, who nodded in turn.
Good.
As each prepared their bed for the night, and before Narrate snuffled out the fire, Tamlin caught Sepheln staring at him. Her head lay on her arm that she used as a makeshift pillow. Her dark eyes stared at his. He waited for her to say something, but her lips twisted instead into a slight frown, and she rolled the other way. Tamlin then laid himself on the cool ground and fell asleep.